Welcome, listeners, to the latest episode of the AdQuick Madvertising Podcast, a podcast that explores the intersection of content, creativity, technology, all of the things that you're interested in. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Scott Monty. He is an internet marketer OG. He was blogging back in the day. He was one of the first marketing bloggers I ever read in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. He has been doing marketing before it was cool and before all of us. He is the one who really pioneered things like social media marketing in the enterprise. He was helping Ford when internally at Ford, they were probably like, why would we even want to post to Facebook? Why would we even want to have a conversation with our users? Scott now runs an awesome Substack and podcast of his own, Timeless and Timely. He does consulting now, but he has been there, done that on the brand and agency side. Scott, welcome to the show.
Adam, it is such a joy to be here. And it's nice to do a return volley, as you were on the Timeless Leadership podcast for, I think it was episode 16.
I think I was fun employed when I was on your show. I believe it's possible I was between jobs, but yeah, your show is great, Scott, and all of your thoughts go right into my inbox. And you've always been sort of one of the people that I looked up to in my career, and it's like, I want to be like that guy.
Oh, well, that's an honor. And it's also a great responsibility. This is the thing that leaders, I think, need to take to heart, is that the most important job you have as a leader is to bring up the next generation of leadership. It's really about service, not only to the entity that you're part of, but to the legacy that you leave behind in the form of other people.
So, Scott, speaking of leadership, one question I wanted to start off with is there's been a bit of controversy around the so-called state of the CMO. And so what I mean by that is the CMO has now a tenure, in a lot of cases, under 2 years. They're doing things like perhaps engaging in the culture wars in ways that you and I would see and be left scratching our heads. Maybe laggards in certain technology areas and then too quick to adopt others, like the metaverse, that don't really make sense. And I think for the great CMOs, like, the CMOs of an Apple and a Nike, everyone is obviously inspired, but that's not the case at a lot of brands. So kind of what's your take going on, given you've spent a lot of time with CMOs? Are you feeling good about the state of the CMO? Is this an unfounded area?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, Adam. So first of all, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. And that is the inability for CEOs and boards, and largely driven by shareholders, to focus on the long term. We see lots of results-driven companies, month to month, quarter to quarter, reporting their numbers, and their fates rise and fall based on those numbers. So in many ways, they're chasing the numbers rather than chasing a strategy. And that's dangerous. And you think back to when Amazon was founded and how Jeff Bezos largely ran the company at a loss for many, many years, decades even. And he had the understanding and the support of the board that understood the long range vision there. And it's incumbent upon the CEO, the CMO, the chief communications officer to take that vision and communicate it regularly to all of the stakeholders so they understand exactly what's trying to be, what they're trying to accomplish. Okay, so that's thing one. Number two, in this mix, we've seen a rise of other CXOs, let's call them, chief digital officers, chief experience officers, chief revenue officers, chief customer officers. Hey, guess what? Those all used to be the responsibility of the chief marketing officer. And suddenly they're getting divided off and taken out. And of course, people are going to pay attention to where the numbers are. They're going to pay attention to the chief revenue officer. They're going to ask the chief marketing officer, why do we need a brand campaign? We don't see any appreciable results from this. Well, again, branding is long-term. And it's something that takes a lot more nuance than lead generation, say. So I think it's incumbent upon the CMO to define what it is that they do, to define their vision that fits the corporate vision, and to communicate that up and across on a regular basis. Absent that, absent that good communication and that clarity of vision, you really are lacking leadership. And when the higher ups, the board, the CEO see a leadership vacuum, well, they're going to fill it. They're going to fill it with somebody else, or they're going to fill it with another role, right? So the CMOs are necessarily being replaced on the regular because of all of these factors.
Yeah, and one thing that's sort of even scarier for not just the CMO, but probably for all of the marketing rank and file is when you see companies like Etsy and I think it was UPS and some other major brands just forgoing the CMO role. And of course, they have senior marketers, but now this all rolls into COO. And I think that right now, marketing is the most important function in a connected world, or at least it should be for a major consumer brand. And so I worry that when everyone is rolling up to COO or CEO, look, in my consulting days, I almost never saw a situation where that was good. Like I never saw that company having great marketing or, big bets and doing things that compounded building a brand, like you said, a long-term compounding effort. So I worry it's also part of like this broader trend of, just basically focus so much on the quarter and the short term, they're going to miss the forest for the trees of building a generational company.
100%, Adam. And I think this really gets to one of the things you mentioned, which was shiny object syndrome. That's not new. I mean, we've been experiencing this since I remember writing about this back in 2006, 2007, when social media was new. And we call it the GMOOT technology, GMOOT, which is where the boss sees something that attracts them in the market, whether it's TikTok now or the metaverse or whatever, and says, "Get me one of those." Gmoot, right? And suddenly the whole team shifts and they're chasing after the shiny object. And that's why in my executive coaching practice, I work with leaders to help them focus on the things that are tried and true, to focus on the attributes and the values that matter to them and that matter to their organization as they're building a culture. Because, there's the old cliche, culture drives strategy. And if you don't have that culture, like Jeff Bezos had at Amazon, with that long-term vision and the patience that goes with it, if you don't have that built in, then it's really difficult to ignore these shiny objects as the market starts to create noise around them, because you don't want to miss out on anything. I mean, I think that's human nature as a leader. You're like, oh, well, we got to be up to speed on this stuff. Well, yes, but you also have to couch it in the terms of what you're trying to accomplish on behalf of all of your stakeholders. And the same thing with, getting involved in culture wars. There's a time and a place for that. If it is core to your brand, if it matters to your customers in a way that they're going to show up differently at your stores or with your products or whatever, then of course you want to have something to say about it. And if it affects your employee base, I remember, I think it was Mark Benioff, when I think it was in Indiana, they made some legislation, anti-gay legislation, and Salesforce had just acquired one of the email companies that had a headquarters in Indiana. And he said, look, we're going to reconsider our business in Indiana because it affects employees who work for us who live there, and we want them to be happy and productive. And in that case, it wasn't a marketing decision. It wasn't a marketing culture war. It was a business decision that was core to what Salesforce was trying to achieve. And I think that's the thing that more leaders need to take stock of, rather than having this knee-jerk reaction to whatever the outrage of the day happens to be.
Yeah, and it's definitely not a new phenomenon. The obvious example this year was Bud Light, which I thought if they were going to do something to support a community, any community, I think it just needs to be tastefully done. And if they had done something like that, there'd be no uproar. I think that was their misstep. But this isn't a new thing. If you remember Pepsi a while ago did remember that ad they did with like the woman holding up
Anti-riot
yeah.
ad.
And it felt you could tell what they were trying to do, but the execution was so bad that
100%.
I think the market sniffs out when you're doing something and it's not, I hate the cliched word authentic, but it's just not real. Like you can tell like the team wasn't bought in, or they're just checking a box, or, barely there. And I think that's like the existential mistake, because if you do something where it's obvious you're paying attention, it's really harder to poke at that. Right.
Exactly. And I think it's this manufactured response when it doesn't feel authentic. Authenticity gets thrown around a lot, but I've been talking about this for years, particularly on social media, back when that was the big shiny object, is that people can see through a fake approach to something, whether it's a brand showing up and crashing the party, or whether it's prepared talking points that have been combed over 5 times by your legal team. I mean, people have BS detectors. And quite frankly, when you show up in a way that's different than people are used to seeing you, then that stands out as well, even if it's really well intentioned. Consistency is probably one of the key attributes of any brand and of any kind of leadership, is showing up in a regular, predictable way every single day. Because what that does, particularly in an environment when there's a lot of uncertainty, when there's a lot of chaos, whether it's geopolitical or whether it's in your particular industry, when people are uncertain, there's a lot of fear. And when you can show up with consistency every day, that creates confidence, it creates hope, and it creates trust. And these are the things that tie people not only to brands, but to other people, that are the basis of good relationships.
I know you have qualms with Zuck, but I actually think Zuck is doing a great job with his image by appearing on podcasts like Lex Friedman, by posting, quirky 2-minute videos where he's talking about, his competitor products. Like, I like Zuck now. I mean, there's missteps of the company, but I think he's doing a good job from just the perspective of what you said, showing up. And he's being himself. He's a nerd, and he's not. I feel like he's not trying to be like anything he's not anymore. And I don't know. I kind of like Zuck here. I don't know if
it's taken him a while to get to this point. He's still awkward.
Yeah.
But look at what we have to compare him to over at X. I mean, anybody is going to shine in comparison to that. So yes, he's working on it. That appearance recently in front of Congress where he was forced to apologize to people, that was really cringy. It was not a sincere apology. It was something that he was very carefully trying to tiptoe around so he wouldn't get himself into legal trouble. I would have liked to have seen that played out a little bit differently, but at least he's showing up for these things and he's trying. So we give him credit for that.
Yeah, I'm at the age of like listening to congressional hearings while I'm working sometimes, and nothing makes me more like depressed about actually both our government and business leaders listening to them. I don't even know how that's possible, but they are. It's not like listening to a business podcast where everyone's confident and just having a nice conversation. Those are. They're interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, humanity laid bare. Let's put it that way.
So, Scott, while we're talking about executives, another area that I think will come up more is something you have unique experience with, and I do a little bit, but you do much more, which is you were a face for Ford and for the company, but you were also a voice internally. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, because what I've seen, and I've spoken with a lot of my peers about this, is that most companies don't really care if you have a voice externally. Startups excluded. Startups want you in the market and making noises. But like the big company, you're not really rewarded for being in media, for speaking, for doing events. Like they just want you to be a voice internally for your team, even if you're in marketing and there's like no reward for you to do it externally, or even sometimes negative rewards. Like, PR might not like what you say, or they don't want you gaining too much of a voice. But it seemed like at Ford, you did a good job threading the needle, maybe one of the best that I've seen. Can you share like some things you learned to help maybe like a VP or CMO in your shoes at another brand who also has a little bit of a voice externally, but how you also keep that internal voice balanced?
It's a great question, Adam. And I think the secret formula behind how I was able to accomplish that at Ford was simply this. I was in corporate communications. I was not in marketing, right? I get tagged as a marketer a lot, and I spent the early part of my career in marketing. When I went to Ford, I was suddenly exposed to the world of communications. And this was largely because in those early days, 2007, 2008, social media was up for grabs. Nobody had dibs on it at that point. And it was really more corely aligned to what communications did. Media relations, spokespeople, working closely with a CEO who is largely the chief communications officer, or not by title, but they are the chief spokesperson for a company most of the time. So it aligned pretty well. And it took a couple of years, but marketing finally caught up, and then there was budget put behind it, and then it became another ad network, essentially. And that's unfortunate, because what it's done is it's cheapened, as you say, the need to have a spokesperson out there. And you talk about authenticity, you talk about building relationships, it's done with a face, it's done with real humans. And I think people appreciated that they now knew somebody within this gigantic company that they could reach out to and ask questions to, or share something with, or give feedback to. And then they would know that they could trust that that person, me in that case, would take that feedback, take that information, and bring it into the company. Maybe something happened with it, maybe something didn't. But they knew that there was an advocate for them as well as an advocate for the company in that kind of role. So I think the first thing that leaders, entrepreneurs can think about is, who is your chief spokesperson? Who has the bandwidth to do what it is that you need to do? Maybe it's the CEO, maybe it's the CMO, maybe it's a junior, somebody junior to these people, but keep somebody around who can show up consistently every single day and be the voice of the customer and be the voice of the company. It's a two-way street, input and output. And it really takes a talented individual to do that, because largely we've been educated and developed to do only one way of messaging out, or if we're in customer service, to receive it in, right? And to kind of have that yin and yang, that push and pull, is really a skill that I think more leaders need to work on.
Yeah, I mean, my experience has been startups super value it if like there's a product manager or product marketing manager at a startup who takes time to, answer people's non-branded questions that they see on LinkedIn or whatnot, or appear on podcasts. That person gets valued at a startup because the results are noticeable. It's like that's like such a great opportunity for a young person to, in some way, shape, or form, be a part of industry conversations.
Right.
I think at the larger the company you're at, you can do it, and you can do it for giving back to the industry. But I don't know that you would expect your team to necessarily value. I think we're a generation of leadership away from that, just because I've spoken, we've been on the same event circuits, and I've spoken from people at many big companies where it's clear they're there because they're super passionate about the product or their case study. And like, maybe the rest of their team cares in an all hands if they share some learnings when they come back. But I just don't sense at larger companies, like they're just, the thinking is so scaled, right? Like they want you to bring in, the million user campaign, or the whatever $1 billion in lift revenue generated. It's just like any of like the one-to-one stuff. Just I think you have to do it because you want to. And at a smaller company, the impact is really real and gets valued.
Yeah, and I think there's another aspect to it, Adam, and that comes into play with respect to the associated fame, as it were. that such an individual gets. After Bill Ford and Alan Mulally, the executive chairman and the CEO, I was the number 3 most requested speaker at Ford. People wanted to hear the Ford story. They wanted to hear, uh, they wanted to peer under the hood, see how the sausage was made, so to speak. And we did that. We granted many of those speaking requests because it helped elevate Ford's brand, right? So it was in service to a business objective. We were trying to get people to think of Ford differently. And if it happened to come through our social media strategy and a face of the brand, well, we're suddenly on the cutting edge. We're a human company, right? A family-run company, but you can put a face to it now. Much like Henry Ford was the face of the company for the first 40 years, that worked to Ford's advantage. So strategically, it made a lot of sense for us. However, what I found internally is it created a lot of professional jealousy among other members of my team because they saw me getting the media hits rather than their executives, right? And believe me, I was an internal consultant to all of the C-suite at Ford to help them become more proficient at social media, right? To give them a chance to do what I think was necessary. The communications professionals I worked with were still the old guard kind of media relations people, developing relationships with journalists, lunches, etc. And I was out there on the speaking circuit. So there became some internal conflict there that I wasn't prepared for professionally. And I think back now, 15 years that it's been since I started there, uh, I would have done things a little differently. I would have been more sensitive, I think, to their insecurities. But at the same time, I would have also told them to pound sand because I was doing what I think needed to be done.
Yeah, and you have no ego when you're doing work. I've seen you speak enough times, and it's just so obvious you just have, heart in mind and helping the world and the mission in mind. And I think that annoys certain people to no end, by the way. But I hate when I see like any team members or people trying to be like petty bureaucrats in the way of someone who's just like obviously trying to do the right thing for a company,
Yeah.
in comms. And I've seen this happen a few times.
And
With
what
certain
was
people.
interesting too, Adam, is that we were the way we like to describe it, doing what we did at Ford with social media. And I started there in 2008. I was there from 2008 to 2014. We called it paving the road behind us. There was no roadmap for where we were going. People didn't understand what the capabilities were. And we viewed it as an opportunity to experiment, to meet people where they were going, to try things differently that hadn't been tried before. And quite frankly, to use examples of big companies in other industries to help inform our best practices. So we didn't need to just think of ourselves as a car company. We needed to think of ourselves as an innovation company, a communications company that happened to make cars, much like Domino's is a digital first company that happens to make pizzas. And they're right down the street here in Ann Arbor.
Domino's is crushing it. I think like
They
I
really
read a
are.
story of like their stock was up more than Google at one point. So
Yeah.
like over the last like 10 years
Now,
or something like that.
make of the pizza what you will, but they're providing an experience for people. And it's really led the way in other industries. And what I likened that to while I was at Ford was the same way Henry Ford took his great innovation, which was the moving assembly line, which was not original to the auto industry, by the way. He looked at meat packing plants. He looked at the textile industry. He looked at a lot of different industries and wove it all together to make it right for what he did. But then the genius move of Henry Ford was bringing in executives from other industries to tour his plants, to give them the insights that he had gained so that the world could move forward together in innovation. And it wasn't only his benefit or his employees, his customers weren't the only ones who were going to benefit. And that's the difference.
Yeah, there's always something to taking inspiration from people in another sector. And I think that's where, you see it with art, you see it with forms of music, you see it with movies, where all of the things that are at the intersection of different genres are like super interesting and fun, and kind of take the best parts of different concepts and bring them together. So this actually leads me to my next question. We talked about your history a little bit. Let's skip to the present. And you write a lot about storytelling, and so I'm fascinated about your view of storytelling in the age of complete ADHD, 20-second TikTok videos. For a certain cohort, they're like fully lobotomized by mobile and social, and a lot of people can't sit down and read a book. If you're a comms person or an ad creative, can you do anything to get past this, or is it just lean in and you got to tell your story in the first 5 seconds of a pre-roll ad, and that's where you're stuck?
This isn't a new question either, Adam. I mean, this is something we've been grappling with since the dawn of online. I don't think there is a set answer for this. What it comes down to is, can you tell a good story? Do you have a good story to tell? Right? It's the same as, how long should my podcast be? My answer, since I started podcasting in 2007, is as long as it needs to be. Right? And the feedback is going to tell you that as well. Because here's the thing. I grew up listening to a lot of radio. And in particular, I listened to Paul Harvey, who has always been, he and Charlie, oh gosh, why am I blanking out his name? Charles Osgood, who just died, by the way. He and Charles Osgood have been my North Stars for audio storytelling. And they've done it in a way that is truncated, right? Paul Harvey had this program called The Rest of the Story. And in about 3.5 minutes, he would embrace you in the ears and bring you on a journey where there was a familiar event or a familiar individual that he would reveal at the last moment. And it was kind of like a Twilight Zone kind of thing, where you get chills when you get to the end, and it's like, oh, irony, or oh, that's who he was talking about. But the idea is, he would take a familiar story and look at it from a different way and tell it in such an engaging way, whether it's like a dad reading to a kid at night before bed, or whether it's like a teacher who just had you wrapped around their finger as they stood up in the lecture hall because they knew how to tell a story. That's the kind of thing we need to be better at as marketers and communicators. And yeah, it can come in 15-second increments. It can come in minute-long increments. It could even be long form, if you've got an audience that is engaged enough and interested enough in the type of story that you're telling, and if you're doing a good job telling it.
And this seems like, I mean, to me, this always seemed like the timeless skill that you sort of need before you can do things like run an A/B test, or, build an analytics stack. Like, all of these things are great, but if you can't tell a story, it's like, it's almost like having, a battleship with loaded weapons and no one on the battleship to launch anything, right? You've got tools and you don't know what to do with them. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at the we're just coming out of Super Bowl season, so look at the classic ad that everyone waits for every single year is the Budweiser Clydesdale ad. And these are usually minute-long spots. And the reason they're minute-long spots is because it takes Budweiser that long to build up not only the physical representation of what they're the Clydesdales and all their majesty and whatever setting they happen to be in, but they're also connecting with your emotions. There's a soundtrack there, a score that usually has some kind of heartfelt music. There's individuals, whether it's a dog or a family or whatever it may be, and you have to be given an opportunity to connect with what's going on there. And they do it in a 1-minute arc and still manage to pull at those heartstrings by the time they get to the 55-second mark, because they've done it masterfully, right? And they've built an expectation over time. We talk about that consistency once again. They're connecting with people's emotions, and there's going to be a payoff at the end. And those are the hallmarks of great storytelling.
I agree. And the Budweiser Clydesdales are obviously a timeless example. What are your thoughts? I won't name specific companies on maybe when you get some of these 100-year-old brands that get like, a marketing team that wants to kind of ignore the history and just do their own thing. Are they respectful of the brand? Can that be done right? Are they just, is it not worth the risk to sort of throw everything out and say we're, a new thing? Like I think it's been tried classically with products, but now it's sometimes tried with just ad creative, and it seems like that risk has cost companies a lot, and it might have upside somewhere, but would you say it's even worth it?
Well, it depends on what they're trying to achieve, I think. And ultimately that's what all of this goes back to, is what's the strategy? And doing creative for the sake of doing creative to win awards or to stand out or whatever it is, that's a false idol.
I think a lot of people are doing creative just to win awards, and it seems to me like a lot of ads are for other advertisers and maybe not for the consumer so much.
You
And
know,
to Go ahead.
their agencies for years have demonstrated their bona fides by looking at their trophy case. Oh, we've won this many Clios, and we've been at, we're a Cannes Lions winner, and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's other advertisers awarding you for being good at the creative aspect, which don't get me wrong, that's important. I think we need to celebrate creativity. We need to encourage creativity. But I would love to see agencies and brands that promote more of the results out of what they did. We saw a lift in our reputation. We saw more engaged consumers show up at our stores, or we had so many questions asked of our customer service representatives as a result. Whatever the metrics are, they should be tied to actual business results rather than just accolades for art.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. I think that we're not just marketing. I think a lot of the business world is very obsessed with pageantry and with certain KPIs that probably don't mean much in the long term, but might feel good in the short term. And it's the difference, I think, between good and great teams. And if I were a young marketer listening to this, we have a lot of young people listening, I would ask probing questions before you join a new marketing team, and see, what are the things that get them excited? Is it going to an award show, in France every year, or is it, coming together and, doing something amazing for the company, and launching a new product and putting together a new cross-channel campaign, and helping the company beat expectations, over the next few quarters, and everyone getting bonuses, right? Like, I'm a capitalist. I want to see my team making more money. I'm not super interested in winning awards. I'd rather have the creative that actually, like, helps me build the company than the one where I have the trophy case.
What's interesting is I have been part of advertising agencies and on the client side as well, where an agency shows up with not with an ad campaign, but with an idea for a product extension, or, shifting around the way you do business, or that you show up, or, more of a strategic level recommendation. And the companies that actually use their advertising agencies for that kind of strategic counsel, I think, are the ones that are going to be more successful, because it's not just about that advertising transaction. It's not just about the lead generation. It's not just about the creative. It's really thinking more broadly about where you're taking your business. And when you've got relationships like that from people who are seeing the world from a different perspective than you, and you can listen to that and implement it in a way that makes sense for your business, then that's a great opportunity.
So, Scott, do you want to share a couple examples of really great company comms that you've seen over the last year? That it could be tech, it could be manufacturing, it could be anywhere else. Just because for our listeners, I think our listeners, like, and our guests are mostly tech company, like marketers and execs and working at startups, and maybe it doesn't even have to be new. You just have such a broad view as a consultant and voice into a lot of different industries. Can you share like a cool comm story win of late?
So I think one of the things that much of the tech world is aware of and struggling with right now, particularly if you're in tech marketing, is the employment space. There have been scads of layoffs, um, mostly necessary, sadly, because there was a lot of staffing up and a lot of expectations from the pandemic. And when the world returns to normal, you don't need that same kind of staffing. It doesn't make it any easier for people, particularly the people who are on the receiving end of those layoffs. And I think we've seen many examples of customers that have failed spectacularly in their layoff process. And to me, the most important part of letting people go is how you communicate it. Not only how you communicate it to the individuals who are being let go, but the individuals who are remaining and who may have what's called survivor's guilt. That really affects morale. And the CEOs that have stood out to me are the ones that have been compassionate in their approach, the ones who have almost taken a thoughtful planning kind of approach with the individuals that they know are going to be impacted, because either maybe they've been impacted before, or they're simply tuned in. That maybe they just have more empathy than other CEOs. And the ones that demonstrate this, that can help these displaced employees plan ahead, to feel more secure about a soft landing, to help them with outplacement services, to notify their networks. I think the CEO of Lyft a while back did that kind of thing, where put out a communication. He said, I want you to know that these people are being let go, and I've got an Excel spreadsheet together. Pick through this list, because there are tons of talented people here that deserve a job at other companies. So I think the ones that we see that are showing up with empathy and compassion, as well as doing the necessary things they have to do to write the business, to make that financial decision, are the ones that are going to succeed in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a great example of, when you see all of these, for example, the TikTok videos of people recording their layoffs in tears. Like, of course, if you're let go, there are people who are going to be in tears. But what does it say if people at your company are going through the effort to, document this and then share it publicly? Like, to me, that communicates you've failed pretty badly somehow if they're that scorned on the way out to scorched earth their company, and also they know probably their personal reputation for a little while. I know one of the people actually got job offers from doing it, which probably isn't the best takeaway either, but just like seeing that as like symptomatic of how companies are doing layoffs, it's pretty bad. Like when you hear stories of people being let go from like just an email, or like all of a sudden like your laptop is turned off and you're at the company for 15 years, right? It's crazy.
And I think that is incredibly jarring, because we've talked for so long about loyalty, about how our teams are like families, and that is a huge mistake. It is not your family. You can't be fired from your family. Well, I suppose you could be. You could be ostracized from your family. But the point here is, it's a business relationship, and if you think that an employer has the same level of loyalty to you as you do to them, well, you're mistaken. It is a business after all. And I don't want people to get jaded about this, but you should look for how leadership runs a company. Do they show up as an interested party? Are they communicating with you? Do they show up in person if you have in-person office time? Are they treating people with dignity and respect? These are some of the great classical virtues that I talk about in my newsletter and in my coaching, is how we actually assess what our values are as human beings, and then how we express them to the people around us. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter whether it's an employee, a boss, a family member. It's about that consistency of your values and how you communicate those values in what you say and in what you do.
I think that's spot on. And it has to be more than giving your team a pizza party, at the end of the quarter for
Right.
beating numbers. But there's things like that people do. And, a lot of these things are memes for a reason because they happen to people. And it's a common thing you
Yeah.
could point at.
I'll give you an example of one way to do this on the regular, particularly for first-time managers. We often find people who are excellent individual contributors. And what do we do? Because they're so great at being individual contributors, we make them management, which is kind of silly when you think about it, because they haven't necessarily demonstrated the skills to be a manager. They've demonstrated the skills to be a good expert at something. So to throw them into a management position and expect them to thrive based on that individual contribution is already kind of fraught. But if you're a first-time manager, the most important thing you can do with your team is to set up one-on-one meetings every single week. You should set aside 30 minutes of time where you are giving your team member on an individual basis 30 minutes to talk about whatever it is they want to talk about. This is not the time for a project update. We have those meetings separately. This is about individual attention and development. And ask them to come prepared with what they want to talk about, with a little agenda. Could be issues they've been having at home. It could be elder care that they're dealing with, or child care, or it could be a struggle with a team member that they're trying to get over. But things that associate with them developing as an individual and, as I said before, as the next wave of leaders that you're looking for. If you are doing this regularly, what you're going to do is you're going to be developing that relationship, you're going to be engendering trust, and it's going to be a two-way kind of loyalty on the individual level, right? Not on the company level, but at least on the individual level. And over time, what that does is it sets a better culture for your entire team.
I love that. And I think another area that I've come to appreciate is I know some ICs that are really like whip sharp at what they do that have specifically turned down promotions. And I know people who have been, I have a friend who's been at Google for, I think 14 years now, and they've offered him many promotions, but he likes his work. And it's actually kind of refreshing because the rest of us, yourself excluded, are part of this perpetual rat race. We want more money, we want more stock, we want more power. And I think it's pretty cool if you really what you like to do, you want to be really good at this one thing, and that's your area of focus. Like good for you. You
Yeah.
don't necessarily have to, like, we at some point we probably don't even need more managers, where we're going to have awesome project management software and tools to organize us, and whatever else that makes our lives function easier. At some point, the specialists will start to matter more, right? So,
Yep. Well, and Adam, I think what you've done there is you have unlocked a millennial long, not millennial as in the generation, but millennials long secret that was known to ancient philosophers, and it particularly came from Thales of Miletus, where someone asked him, "What is the most important thing in life?" And he said, "Know thyself." Right? If you understand who you are, a sense of self-awareness and what you stand for and what you are looking for and how you show up, that's the most important thing, because it then dictates all of the decisions you make, the decisions about what kind of job you're going to take, how you're going to be in a relationship, what you're going to show up as to your team members, to your direct reports, to your boss. Right? That defines who you are. So you have to know yourself first.
I love that. Scott, I don't think we're gonna beat that story, no matter what questions I ask next. So let's wrap with having you share where our listeners can find you online and get more Scott.
God help you. Well, you can find me at scottmonty.com. That'll expose you to my coaching practice, my speaking opportunities, if you'd like to have me come talk to your group. Or if you're a first-time manager or executive and you want to have a kind of a mentor or a guide to help you explore what it is that means a lot to you, And of course, there's links to my newsletter and podcast there as well, which are Timeless and Timely is the newsletter, and Timeless Leadership is the podcast.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. We will also put links to Scott's site in the descriptions. So if you didn't catch the audio or you just want a link, we'll make it super easy for you. Thank you so much for tuning in again this week. We will have another episode for you next week and speak to you then.